My best friend Meredith and I run a community theater. This year, I was appearing in a play alongside a man with whom I had never worked before, Joshua. My character was a mystic, and because I was also costuming this production, I was on the hunt for interesting jewelry that I could wear on stage. Joshua mentioned an appropriate ring he owned. It was perfect. I slipped it on my finger and had been wearing it for some time before he mentioned his history with it. It was a remnant from his days dabbling in the occult, and he admitted to using it ritualistically. I immediately took it off and set it aside, but tried to laugh along. Joshua left that day for a pre-approved vacation without taking it home. I spoke with Meredith about it, and we tried to laugh it off as we cleaned up for the night. But we're superstitious theater people, so it made our skin crawl. In any case, I headed out, and she stayed behind to catch up on some production work. 2 hours later, I got a phone call from her, in tears. She had been sitting on stage when an enormously tall black shadow walked across the back of the house. It towered larger than any human being and filled her with such overwhelming dread that she left through the back door, locked up, and immediately picked up the phone to call me. When we returned the next day, the building simply felt heavy, oppressive. Stepping outside was enough to chase the sensation away, but it would always return the second you passed through the doors. Actors fought quite a bit that week over forgotten lines and missed blocking. A sofa set piece broke when an actress lay on the arm. She said the arm had been held on with jagged nails, and she nearly pricked herself on them. People who had overheard Joshua talking about the ring started to blame it. Toward the end of the week, Meredith and I were sitting outside the building, too nervous to stay in there too late. Through a window, we both saw a shadow block out the light before moving out of view. She asked me if I had seen it, and I said that I had. I walked her home that night. The next day, we dug up some religious candles out of the props and surrounded the ring with them. While it did not ease the oppressiveness of the space, we never saw anything else. Joshua returned, and I approached him. I told him some people had heard about the ring's story, and that it would probably be best if he just took it home since it had everybody on edge. He did. Meredith and I stayed late after he went home that night, and for the first time in days we could breathe. The theater felt light again. Nothing like this has happened since, 2 productions later. Now, I still look back on this week with a grain of salt. I wonder if knowing the ring's story made us uneasy and we all fed into our own mass hysteria and natural theater stress until it bubbled out of control. I don't know. I do know that he had used that ring while also using a Ouija board, and I know that he had used that ring while doing the dark arts. I also know that it wouldn't make sense to just blame it on mass hysteria, because not everybody had heard his story. Either way, I'll be sure to ask the next person who offers me jewelry how they came to own it. I was 16. It was summer, and the age before the internet and cell phones, circa 1988, so boredom was a real thing. My friend B and I were getting into New Age stuff, but apparently crossed the line when we found a leather-bound red book on witchcraft. From it, we learned how to make a magic circle with a knife on my bedroom floor. Then we used the top wood piece from my desk, it slid out, as a Ouija board base. We even followed the directions in the book and painted on the numbers and letters with green paint. That was supposed to make a difference. I used watercolors. I'm not stupid, I just didn't want to ruin my desk. We used an upside-down plastic margarine container as a planchette for the spirits to move around. We balanced it between us as we sat Indian style in the middle of the circle. We put our fingers on it, 1 finger from each hand. As soon as we touched it, it started zooming around the board. My friend squealed and took her hands off. I did not, and I know I wasn't pushing it around. So we asked lots of things. What I remember most was how it told me some things about my mother's death that I didn't know, I confirmed these details later as soon as I turned 18 and was able to access the police records from the investigation. We asked a lot of questions about what boys liked us and stupid stuff like that, but I was the only one who would continue to touch it. So later, after cleaning up the desk piece and hiding the book, I started to get really bad headaches, and I couldn't hold down food. I stayed in bed for a week and a half, hardly eating. I lost 15 pounds, but at the time I was kind of excited about it. The whole time I'm laying in the dark room, I saw, with my mind's eye, a demon crouched on the dresser at the foot of my bed. It looked like a gremlin with glowing red eyes and burned-looking skin, and it just grinned at me. Eventually, my dad, who's a physician, decides I'm dangerously ill and actually need medical treatment, so I get admitted to the hospital. I was terribly weak, dehydrated, and my head had never stopped hurting. After a spinal tap, they told me that I had viral meningitis. I stayed a few days with IVs and such. Because it was a virus, I had to wait it out. I barely lived through it. A few weeks later, I'm back home, but so weak I can't walk across the house without having to rest on the way. I'm constantly hunched over and I can't stand straight. The same friend, B, came by and reminded me that weekend was the psychic fair put on by the local New Age store and would have tarot card readers and various vendors. We'd been planning on going all summer. I warn her that we can't stay long because I'm so weak, but she's cool with that, so we go over. As soon as we walk in, a lady screeches, "Oh my God!" She rushes over to me and I get surrounded by the psychic readers and healers. Several of them are freaking out. The one that screeched tells me I have a demon in my back and proceeds to do an aura cleaning right then. She said to imagine golden bubbles were flowing all over me. Then she took her hand and swept it around me, close to my skin but without touching me. She did this all over, head to the floor and all around me. And then I felt claws rip out of my back. All of a sudden I could stand up straight and I felt completely better. Apparently she cleansed me with white light. Incidentally, I've imitated her actions with friends later who had bad headaches and their headaches wouldn't go away. She didn't even ask for money, and I didn't even think about paying her. She and the others seemed pretty shaken up and were aghast when we told them the whole story. Supposedly, what I had done was open a channel with no protection or proper guidance, and a dark entity took advantage. I now read tarot cards, and I'm very careful about what I do. I consider paying it forward. I get to help other people, like those ladies helped me. This all started a few years ago when I was deployed to Okinawa, Japan with the Marines. One night, a few of us got drunk and brought a homemade Ouija board, an MRE box and Sharpie marker, to an abandoned barracks that was supposedly haunted. All of the junior Marines decided to ask questions like, "Will I see combat?" or "Will my girlfriend marry me?" I decided to ask who we were talking to. The answer I received was ZD. We promised we would talk to him the following Sunday. It never happened. The only thing I can think of to this day is that it was someone who died in battle in Okinawa in World War II. Nonetheless, I come home a few months later, and that's when weird things really started to happen. I am not a superstitious man. However, my wife is a superstitious woman. The first thing I personally started noticing was that my eyes would inadvertently start looking up at the top of the stairs. Then my dogs, when seated on the couch downstairs, would start barking fiercely at the top and middle of the stairs. This is when one of my junior Marines came into play. One day I made mention of my dogs always barking at things I couldn't see, when John, a lance corporal who was there during the Ouija board incident, told me that he and his wife had been experiencing things such as him hearing somebody call his name but no one else being in the house, to his wife being afraid to go into their bedroom due to something pulling on her hair as soon as she entered the room. My wife started talking about a malevolent presence she felt in our house as soon as it started becoming more present. She called me crying one day, stating that something dark and malevolent had woken her up. I went to work around 5 a.m., and had been extremely close to her face. This presence affected our marriage significantly when I told her that I did the Ouija board. She told me that I summoned something or someone that I wasn't supposed to. My marriage deteriorated the next few months to the point where we slept in different rooms. Apparently, the thing told my wife I won right outside of my house. That was 3 months ago. My wife and I reconnected when I went to a different job school, and we were separated and realized that we indeed were the only ones for ourselves. She told me that she saw the thing again when she had taken a picture of herself and the thing was behind her. Since then, we have moved and have not felt the thing until tonight when I started typing this. I had the notion that it stopped following us until about the 3rd paragraph when my browser shut down. I said screw it until about 30 minutes later when I started typing again. Once again, about the 3rd or 4th paragraph down, the door leading from the living room to the hallway to our bedroom opened up. I'm only telling the story to find out what I can do and to confirm whether or not it was truly my fault. In 2011, I studied abroad in Dakar, Senegal, which is on the coast of West Africa. One night, after I had been there for months already and knew a lot about the culture, some Senegalese friends of mine from the Dakar neighborhood where I was living invited me and another American to go watch their friend play in a soccer game at the city stadium. Not having had the chance to go to a sporting event at a stadium in Senegal yet, we eagerly agreed, especially since it meant dodging homework. Once there, it was about what I would have expected, a large, unadorned concrete stadium in the middle of one of the neighborhoods, fairly crowded, but not packed. It was a neighborhood match in which teams from various neighborhoods face each other in a tournament. Thus, loyalty was intense, and the stands were separated by team. Our team was supposed to be the better team, and it showed. The score throughout the game was 0-0, but our team was always pressuring the other one. It seemed like only a matter of time before they scored and locked it up. Now at this point, I should mention that Dakar, like many African cities, experiences power cuts frequently and seemingly at random. I should also mention that this was happening about 2 to 3 months after the rainy season was supposed to be over. While sitting in the stands, I happened to notice a bright red flash off in the distance among the buildings behind the stadium. It took me off guard. I had never seen anything like that before. I turned to my American friend and asked her about it, but she hadn't seen it. It was momentary. I waited for the sound of whatever it had been to reach me. I figured it was some kind of explosion, but no sound came. However, in those few seconds after the flash, when I was contemplating what it could have been to flash so brightly yet so silently, 2 strange events occurred almost at the same time, literally within 30 seconds of each other. First, the stadium lights cut off. My first thought was, oh, just a power cut. Bummer. But I looked up from our high-up position and saw that the lights of the surrounding neighborhood were all still on. So I became somewhat alarmed. Who had cut the lights? At the same moment, a torrential downpour started, seemingly out of nowhere. Again, it was not supposed to be raining at all this time of year. At this point, there is mass confusion. I'm looking around the stadium to try to understand what may have happened. Outside the stadium on the street, I see what appears to be a riot developing. How it could have gathered so quickly, I don't know. No one had had time to file out of the stadium. By now, I was very alarmed of a stampede or any number of other possible dangers, so my friends and I made our way down to a quiet spot underneath the stands. When I asked my Senegalese friends what the hell had happened, they all nonchalantly explained, gris-gris. For those who don't know, a gris-gris is a West African term for a talisman, or sometimes simply a magic spell. It has a similar meaning in America thanks to voodoo's influence. I had seen and heard of gris-gris before, but always thought little of them. They seemed sure that the other team had visited a dark marabout or shaman beforehand to curse the game so that they wouldn't lose, since they knew they were the weaker team. Silly witchcraft, right? In that moment, though, I have to tell you, I had no explanation for what could have happened. All I had was coincidence. What was the red flash that made no sound off in the distance? Why had the stadium lights cut only and not the neighborhood lights? Why did it suddenly torrentially rain out of season, which, by the way, totally stopped as soon as we walked out of the stadium's neighborhood? Again, all I had was coincidence, and that's still what I believe, that maybe it really was just all a coincidence. But I tell you, that was one of the strangest phenomena I have ever witnessed, whether it was coincidence or black magic. So before I begin, I just want people to know something about my dad. He grew up in the ghetto, and in a very bad side of the town we grew up in. He saw a lot of things that a kid should never see. Without getting into details, there's not a single thing that scares my dad anymore. Nothing. He's a very old school, thuggish, tough-loving type of person. No superstition. My dad is one of the toughest and badass people I've ever met, but when he told me this story, I've never seen my dad so scared in all my life. This happened when my dad was 17. My dad was hanging out with one of his friends, Carlos. Coincidentally, the same name of me and my dad, me being the third. At a levee, chilling with a group of friends. My dad decides he needs to take a leak and trails off far away from his friends. While going to the bathroom, he notices a house across the levee with someone standing outside of it. He said the house looked like the house from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to give you an idea. When looking at the house, my dad walked towards it because he saw the person looking straight at him and coming close to him. When the person finally got close enough to my dad made out a sort of shadowy, devilish figure and ran back to his group of friends. He was so scared that he got in his car and drove back home, telling his friends that he needed to go home because his mom needed him there. The next day, my dad goes to Carlos's house to hang out with him. Carlos asks why my dad had left in such a hurry. My dad explained to him that he saw a figure at the end of the levee and felt like it was evil, so he decided to leave before anything else happened. Carlos tells my dad of another haunting that happens to him, saying that he could hear kids crying and laughing at the same time. Now at the time, Carlos was a huge stoner, and my dad believed it was the illegal substances and wasn't convinced. When Carlos was trying to convince him that what he heard was real, my dad noticed the leaves started to fall gracefully, one by one. Keep in mind this is during the summer and the leaves were falling very slowly, which is a weird occurrence. When my dad pointed out all the leaves, he said that he then saw a white van move so fast but so slow that you couldn't see it, and it made no sound whatsoever. He said it was the same van that apparently tried to take his sister and himself earlier in his life. Side note, I explained to him that it was death riding on a white pale horse, and he did say that he and his friends were caught slipping by a rival gang group earlier in that day. My dad, being very creeped out by the random occurrences, remembers that he had a Ouija board that he bought for his brother-in-law, who was deported before he could give it to him, and decides to dust it off and use it. This is where the truly creepy stuff kicks in. Carlos and my dad set up the Ouija board and start to ask it questions. The first thing they asked was, did Carlos really hear kids crying and laughing, or was that the illegal substances? The board spells out L-I-S-T-E-N. Listen. My dad then says he actually heard kids crying and laughing at the same time, and that it was genuinely disturbing. My dad asks, what's happening to the kids? The board says, D-Y-I-N-G. Dying. My dad asks how. The board spells out M-U-R-D-E-R. My dad asks, who is the oldest? The board says 15. My dad says, who is the youngest? The board says 8. Carlos is examining that my dad is doing some voodoo magic and tells my dad to cut it out. My dad swears it isn't him, then asks the board to prove itself that the spirit is really there. The board spelled out cats. My dad said, "Cats?" My dad then says he sees a bunch of cats come from out of nowhere, meowing like crazy, while there was one black cat standing out. My dad asks, "Where is the spirit?" And the board says it's the black cat. My dad and Carlos are now both totally tripping and ask the board what it wants. Again, the board spells listen. After a few moments of silence, my dad and Carlos hear a loud ping and bolt away. They come back to the board and see a nail with a perfectly tied black ribbon around it. They put the board away until the next day, where their friend Heather comes over. Now, it's important to know that Heather had a pager and a red car. So the next day, Heather comes over, and my dad and Carlos explain to him what happened. Heather doesn't believe them, so they decide to pull out the board. My dad and Carlos ask the same questions. The cats come back, and they hear the children laughing and screaming. Heather then yells at my dad, saying he thinks they're both playing tricks on him. So my dad then gets the idea to get the board and spell out the address of Heather, considering my dad and Carlos did not know it. Heather agrees. The board begins to spell it out. And before the board could spell the last number, Heather slapped the board away, yelling at my dad and Carlos, saying whatever trick they were playing on her needed to stop. Just then, Heather's pager goes off, and it spells out 4311, which, for those who are confused, spells out hell. And the board then says, answer. Heather refuses and leaves their place without anything else occurring. After she leaves, my dad decides to get this whole group of friends together later that night. They all get together and the same thing happens. The cats, the kids crying and laughing, and even Heather's pager going off again. However, my dad asked it 2 additional questions. 1, is it the same figure he saw at the levee? And 2, what did it want from him? To the first question, the board answered yes. And to the final question, the board answered, your soul. My dad freaked out and tried to say goodbye to the board, but it kept saying no. After a bit of back and forth, the board piece moves by itself, swishing around in a circle. It blows out the candles lit around the board, and it goes completely silent. Then, all of a sudden, they hear a weird screeching sound. As soon as it stops, they hear the same loud ping from both times that it happened before, and they find another, larger needle with a black tie wrapped around it. They then decided to call it a night and left for home. The next morning, my dad sees that his car has a flat tire and decides to take it to the shop. The guy who worked on his car said he needed a completely new tire. When the guy showed my dad the tire, there were 3 claw marks in it that looked as if Wolverine himself had slashed those tires. It suddenly clicked that the screeching from last night was coming from the tires. After that day, my dad swore on his life to never touch a Ouija board or involve himself in anything paranormal ever again, and nothing further happened. So I'm pretty sure the majority of us have used or know somebody who has used a Ouija board. I'm going to tell you my worst experience with one. I was young, around 16 or 17, and it was the middle of summertime, so I had a lot of free time on my hands after a long day of playing out with friends. I decided to invite a handful of my friends over to my house. My mom was out all night, so it was the perfect time to try out the Ouija board. I was thinking about doing it for a while now, and I'd always been curious about the paranormal. Anyway, the Ouija board is all set up, and we start to use it. All my friends didn't seem to take it as seriously as I was, all laughing and joking around, that sort of thing. But after using it for around 5 minutes, we get in contact with a spirit. She was 5 years old and said she was Russian, and that her name was Vama. It got a little tense when she spelled out her name, and my friends started to take it a little more seriously, except for one of my best friends who just didn't believe anything was happening. Then, after a few more minutes, the door opened in the room we were using for the session. The girls got a little freaked out, but we continued to play. After talking to the spirit for around 10 minutes, we found out that she wasn't the only one in the house. We asked her, how many spirits are there then? The board moved. 1, 9. I said, 19. The board said yes. Vama said that there were 19 others and that we had let them in by playing with the board. Some of us were scared. Others in the group were growing tired of what they felt was a charade, so we decided to wrap it up. I'm sure most of you are aware that there is a proper way to close out a Ouija board session. Every member has to say goodbye. Nobody is to leave the circle until this and a few other things have been done. But one of my friends just lifted her finger, got up, and left the room. "Hey," I said, "you can't do that. You have to come back and do it properly." She just shrugged at me and left the room. As you might imagine, this is where things get really interesting. I asked the spirit if we could leave, and she said no. She told us that she was scared, but wouldn't tell us why. We kept asking her to let us leave, but she kept refusing us every single time. Out of nowhere, my best friend raised his voice and said, "Leave us alone. You're not even real. If you were, you'd show yourself." All of a sudden, we heard a loud bang within the room. The door slammed shut. We all sat there, completely shook. I looked over to my right side and I noticed a facial imprint starting to appear within the glass window. I pointed it out, so I knew I wasn't the only one seeing it. And sure enough, everyone else saw the facial imprint. They all saw it. At that point, everyone left the room screaming, except for me and my best friend. I thought maybe we were just seeing things, so I tried to rub the facial imprint away, but it wouldn't disappear. At that moment, it all felt too real, so I freaked out and ran out of the room. We left the house, and on our way out, we started hearing banging and noises. Voices started to shout things like leave, go, and get out. I wasn't about to sleep there, so I slept at a friend's house that night. Fortunately enough, nothing has happened since, and I know that there are scarier things that have happened to people who use the board. But for me, that was the scariest night of my life. One day, when I was in a Walmart with my friend, we headed down to the electronics department and the toy aisle. We were looking to pick up a gift for a much younger friend's birthday party. Instead of heading straight to the electronics section, where we were going to shop for ourselves, we decided to start out in the toy aisle. This friend of ours loved board games, so we figured we'd go ahead and look in that section. We had circled the board games aisle probably 5 times before we turned the corner once more, about to give up. Sitting right in the middle of everything was a Ouija board. There were no other boards in sight, or even a space where the boards would normally be sold. What's even weirder is that the board had absolutely not been there on any of our previous trips through the area, and we were the only ones in that section. Curious, we took the board to one of those in-store item scanners. We scanned the barcode and the display says, "Item not found." Now we were getting a little freaked out. There was no Walmart price tag, no shelf marking, nothing. So we find an employee and ask about it. She looks at it with a confused expression and says, I've never seen any of my coworkers put this out, and I'm quite sure we don't sell Ouija boards here at all. I honestly don't know what to tell you." What's weirder is that while this thing did have a barcode printed on it, it didn't have a company name. It didn't have the listed price, which most items made by companies do. It had no markings that would indicate it had been made by a corporation or a board game company. It was like the thing had come here from another dimension. Either way, you can be darn sure that we did not take it home. My friend and I opted to leave the cursed board in Walmart and get out of there. We shopped elsewhere for our friend's gift that day. I've gone to share my story a few times, but something has always stopped me. But I really need to share this, as I think I might need help. This might be a long story, but thanks for hearing me out. Just a few things. I know it's silly to take part in a Ouija board session. I was young and I trusted my parent. I also try to keep an open mind and find a reasonable explanation for things, but I'm starting to think that I need to take action. Here goes. When I was 15, my mom suggested doing a Ouija board, just us two. I agreed, as I was interested in that sort of thing. I was too young to understand the severity of taking part, and my nan and great-grandma used to read tea leaves and dabble in this sort of thing. I'm naturally attracted to anything of a paranormal nature. However, it is truly one of the biggest regrets I have, but it's also changed my life. We made a makeshift Ouija board out of paper and sat down at our glass dining room table. Fast forward 15 minutes and nothing has happened, and we start to chat. We decide to try again around 10 minutes or so later. This time, we can feel that the glass has some form of energy. We could feel the resistance between the glass and the table. Nothing the spirit said was comprehensible at first, but then it spelled out Fred when we asked its name a few times. My granddad's name was Fred, and looking back, this may have been a way to gain our trust or something along those lines, because what we contacted was definitely not Fred. Then the answers began to not make sense again. We asked questions such as, how old are you, and general things like that. Nothing that I think would be too upsetting to answer. However, after we asked if they needed help with anything, the glass started moving in a circle quite violently. At this point, I was petrified. I asked my mom to stop playing with me and to stop it, but we were both in disbelief. My mom asked what it wanted, and this is one of those moments that nobody has ever believed. It spelled out my name. We both started crying, and that's when I knew that my mom was not the one moving the glass, and that it was certainly not Fred. That was it for me. Absolute game over. We said goodbye and went to bed. That was that. We didn't really speak about it after that. But of course, that's not where the story ends. Shortly after, I started to get the feeling that somebody was watching me, mostly whenever I was in the bathroom. I had had that feeling before the Ouija board, but after experiencing what being watched truly felt like, I knew that before the Ouija board, my brain was just playing tricks on me, as it tends to do to all of us. But now it was a serious feeling of someone's eyes piercing into me. I would be in the shower, and bottles would knock over in the cupboard next to me. Minor, I know, but this is important for reference as to how things escalated as I have grown up. I would shout, "Okay, that's enough now, leave me alone," and so it would for a little while. One night, around 2 weeks after that night, my mom asked me to empty the dishwasher before I went upstairs. Being a teenager, I ignored her and went upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard what I thought was a lot of knives and forks being dropped in the kitchen. My mom shouted at me to be more careful, but I shouted downstairs that I wasn't in the kitchen. When my mom went to inspect, she couldn't see anything. When she opened the cupboard, the glass we had used as a planchette had burst. The rim was jagged, kind of like a shark's teeth, and the shattered glass was in a perfect circle around the glass. We tried to laugh it off and carry on with life. I want to note that after doing the Ouija board, I became unwell. I struggled with an eating disorder for around a year when I was 16. I have heard that some spirits can have an effect on your mental well-being. So if anybody knows anything about that, please do tell. Anyway, fast forward to 4 years later, my mom has divorced my dad and we moved to the city center. We live in an old tobacco warehouse on the docks. The place is old, but not at all scary. Charming, actually. This is when the activity really started to increase for both of us. I lived with her for around 6 months before I got my own place, and weird things would happen while I was there. We both saw a black figure walking around our rooms. This was a first for me, as I have always felt a presence but never saw one manifest itself. I once had to ring my mom from the other room as I heard footsteps growing closer from the bathroom to my bedroom. It entered my bedroom and stopped right next to me. The room went so cold. Again, I tried to ignore it and I carried on with life. Then one day I was in the kitchen about to tell my mom that I was getting back together with my toxic, now ex-partner. We were stood cooking and we had a clock above the hob. The clock fell straight down in front of us, stopped at eye level, spun about 2 or 3 times, and then flew to the right of me. That really freaked us out, as we both couldn't believe how it could have done that. Fast forward again to the present day. I am in my own flat with my new partner of 9 months, and we're super close. We always go to say the same things, not generic things, but things only you would say conjured from your own brain. It's the strangest thing. We always joke that we're the same person in different bodies. My girlfriend is a skeptic and never really believed me about anything before moving in with me. One night I was cuddling her from behind, and when she turned to face me, she was completely freaked out and said, "There was someone in the bed next to you." And that completely freaked me out, as I did feel a presence before she said that. A week or so later, my mom called me crying as she thought her house had been broken into. She has these enormous iron doors that lead to her balcony in the living room. I never open these doors, as they're nearly impossible to lock again once you get them open. When my mom came home from work, the doors were wide open and the key was still on the hook next to the doors. She never opens those doors. Luckily, her new boyfriend is a security-conscious guy and had webcams installed. They checked the footage to see who might have broken in. At 3 p.m., the security camera shows that the doors opened all on their own. Now this is the moment that led me to finally tell my story. Last night, my girlfriend and I were drifting off to sleep in our bedroom. We both woke up at the exact same time. I laid there with my eyes open, thinking I had just had a nightmare and that it would be okay, but then I hear her say, "I just had a nightmare." So I asked her what happened. She started telling me that a black figure came in through the window and wouldn't say anything to us. Apparently, I was asking what it wanted, but it wouldn't respond. I vaguely remember trying to speak in my sleep. It just kept coming closer and closer. I had the exact same dream. However, my girlfriend's dream cut off when the figure got close to us, but I stayed asleep until the figure was practically on top of me and felt 5 prods in my back, like someone was digging their finger in hard. We were both absolutely freaked out, as you can imagine. I'm worried. This has been going on since I was 15, but I do fear that whatever it is getting stronger and starting to pour into different areas of my life the longer it stays. I have no idea what's going on, but I do need some very serious help. A short background into my life. I've always been a relatively normal girl. I've always had friends. I'm just about to finish higher education. I've never had financial problems or even been seriously ill. Things just always went on smoothly with my life. More or less, I never believed in the paranormal. But things that have happened to me this past year have made me doubt. I'll start from the beginning. About a year ago, my boyfriend and I spent a night alone in a pretty big house. We were sick of just watching movies or TV, so we decided to think of something different to do. The other night, we had been watching a horror movie about a Ouija board, and we'd been talking about the fact that none of us had ever tried one. Since neither of us believed in the paranormal, we decided to try it just for fun. We were kind of silly about the whole thing, trying to make it something romantic instead of something serious. We turned off all the lights in the house, and I decided to grab a piece of paper to make the board. I Googled a picture of the board and copied it. My boyfriend turned on some candles, and I did a quick Google search on how to do the whole thing. As I remember it, I just clicked on the first link and read that we should take a glass, place it on the board, and with a finger on it, we should make the infinity sign 10 times, then stop. I think I stopped my research here, so that was all we did. We were sitting opposite of each other, and we started asking some questions. Nothing happened for the 10 to 15 minutes we were holding our fingers on the glass. The mood kind of left us, and my boyfriend started to get a bit silly. The weather outside was pretty bad this night, and the wind made a sound in the house wall outside. At this point, my boyfriend started laughing and saying, "It's probably Zozo. Hey Zozo, is that you?" He remembered this name from the movie we had watched. I laughed at his efforts to scare me, and I also said something regarding the name. I do remember saying the name out loud. We had lost the mood at this point, and we started talking about doing something else. We just removed our fingers from the glass and started cleaning up. I took the paper of the board and started folding it. We were house sitting, and I didn't want the house owners to see it in the trash can. But in the last moment, I decided to bring it into our room instead and put it in our personal trash that we would be taking out. It wasn't that I felt we had done anything wrong. It was just because I was a bit embarrassed by the whole thing, and I wanted to make sure that nobody saw. The evening went on, and eventually we went to bed. The next morning, I was about to start cleaning our room, and I came across the paper of the board. It was clean and open. The foldings I had made the other day was gone. I asked my boyfriend about it, but he didn't take it seriously, again laughing and saying, "Oh, maybe Zozo wanted to talk more to you." I grabbed the paper and looked at it, and in the corner where the word "yes" was written, the text was smeared out like we had spilled water on it or something. But we didn't spill anything on this paper. We each had a glass of wine while we were doing this, but this was no wine stain. It looked like water had been spilled on it. I was uncomfortable, but I shrugged it off and threw it away. We forgot about the whole thing and moved on with our lives, and I didn't think about the incident until last month. The thing is that after this session, my life has changed. A lot. And only for the worse. I don't want to give you any details, but I can give you an overview. My studies, that always went well, started going incredibly bad. I started losing relationships. My relationship to my partner almost broke apart. I ended up with very bad financial problems. Everything that had always worked out for me just stopped working completely. In addition, more or less everything that could possibly go wrong for me did go wrong, to the point where the people around me started asking me where all of this bad luck was coming from. I take it pretty seriously when other people start to see things like that, since humans tend to feel more sorry for themselves than others do. I think you know what I mean by this. Bad habits I had have increased in intensity, and this bad luck I have is insane. Every tiniest thing that can possibly go wrong goes wrong. I'm often sick. You'll just have to take my word on this. The past year has been the worst year of my life. For a relatively normal person, the things happening to me are so abnormal. We have a dog that very often just barks into nothing in our home. My boyfriend often makes jokes, saying that we have a ghost. The other month, I decided to think about this a bit more, and I Googled a little. As I now understand it, we did a lot of things wrong that night. A lot. Especially when saying the name of the entity out loud so many times. I also started remembering that thing about the piece of paper, our board. It was just very, very strange, since I so clearly remember that I had folded it to hide it in the trash. We also didn't finish it up correctly. We never said goodbye, we just stopped. I've never been open to these things, but this bad luck in my life has gone on for so long that I'm open to anybody telling me the Ouija board session had something to do with it. I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but my partner also experienced some of this to a certain extent, and things have been happening to him, but not nearly as much. It's mostly me. Since I don't have any prior knowledge about this, I have no idea what to expect. I don't know what we did. What could I do now? I don't know how long I can take this streak of bad luck. It has to come to a stop, right? So my mom told me about this time when she was 15 or 16, and she and her friends at the time loved to try creepy stuff out to entertain themselves. One night, my mom and her friends played light as a feather, stiff as a board, with 7 people. One person laid down while the other 6 sat around her with only 2 fingers of each person under the girl laying down. One of the girls had to make up a story about how the girl laying down dies. They used past tense, just in case. And then they had to chant a certain phrase. I think it was light as a feather, stiff as a board, the name of the game, while lifting the girl. My mom said it worked and that they lifted their friend at least 5 inches off the ground. It scared the girls half to death because the girl being lifted said it felt like she was paralyzed and couldn't breathe. They all ended up freaking out and basically dropped her. After they played that, they decided that it would be a great idea to play with a homemade Ouija board. It must have been a traumatic experience because my mom refused to tell me what the board ended up saying. What she did say was that as soon as the activity on the board started, a rocking chair in the living room began rocking by itself aggressively and wouldn't stop. Even when she went over and physically stopped the chair, the second she let go, it would start back up. This event terrified her so much that she took the chair outside and smashed it, although she and I both doubt that that did any good. To this day, she refuses to tell me what the board said, but she's adamant that I never touch a Ouija board, and I'm sure that I never will. Welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed that set of stories. I know that one of them in the beginning wasn't technically Ouija board related, but it was occult and dark art, so I went ahead and included it because it was good. I hope you guys enjoyed that story, those stories, and I really hope that you guys didn't hear all of the construction work in the background. I live in Southern California, and it is still really hot, even though it should be cooling down, and there's just no way I can close the windows in the office to record. But people just start working really early in the morning, apparently, so hopefully the background noise wasn't too bad, and if it was, I apologize. I will try to get up earlier to do the next video. I am still working on the night marathon stuff, of course, which is why I haven't had as many videos out recently, but I do have a few more for you guys coming up soon and throughout the month of September. So thank you so much for being here. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. And if you do subscribe, be sure and tick that notification bell so you never miss an opportunity to take a journey into the night.